Welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett. Before we jump into today's episode, talking to Tyler Metcalf about the Minnesota Timberwolves. We had him on earlier in the year to talk about potential playoff seeding with the Wolves, where they might, could place potentially into the finals, as well as Anthony Edwards' ascension as a superstar. This time, the Wolves went up 2-0 on the Nuggets, and then obviously the Nuggets won Game 3 and Game 4, and now its series is all tied up. So we brought Metcalf back for the second time to talk about that. You also hear at the end of the pod my reactions and thoughts to the Atlanta Hawks winning the first overall pick. Despite just a 3% chance, we'll get into some of the storylines there, what it means, and should the lottery change. Let us know your comments Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Excuse me. Before we jump into that, just wanted to mention that SeatGeek is the presenting sponsor of the Two Pointers Podcast. $20 off your first purchase if you use code TWOPOINTERS, TWOPOINTERS. If you're wondering, hey, how could SeatGeek really be beneficial to me? If you're going to any concerts, sporting events, any really event with a ticket this summer, baseball, concert, whatever it might be, you're able to get a deal score out of 1 to 10, letting you know what the best possible deal is, so you know you're not overpaying, as well as at most venues in the United States, you're able to see a seat, see the view from your seat. So really great promotion there from SeatGeek. $20 off your first purchase. Code 2Pointers, link in the top of the description or in the SeatGeek app using that code. That also does help support the show. So thank you very much to SeatGeek for sponsoring. Thank you guys for continuing to use the code. If you are interested in tickets, $20 at the first purchase. Code 2Pointers. Greatly appreciate the support there. So now that we got the housekeeping out of the way, let you know what we're talking about today. Let's enjoy the interview with Tyler Metcalf. All right, we're joined now again. First time in a couple of months now. I guess we talked sometime February, March. I'd have to look back again. With Tyler Metcalf of No Ceilings and other places as well. And look, this is less of like the fandom angle of things, but this is like last time I asked you a lot of stuff about the fandom part of it, and also just where we were in the league with Anthony Edwards. A lot of great things for the Timberwolves, and then obviously we talked a lot about like what their playoff potential could be. This isn't necessarily a follow-up to that conversation, but before we jump into that, introduce people that might be new to you or to this podcast, what you were working on, what we got you here for, and then we'll talk Timberwolves playoffs too.
Yeah, and I kind of do some Timberwolves coverage over at canishoopus.com. That's SB Nation's Timberwolves specific site. The team over there has been doing incredible coverage all season. So, it's kind of led by fans, but really in-depth analysis. A handful of the guys do really in-depth X's and O's breakdowns. Others are more kind of philosophy, fandom stuff, awesome stuff over there. And then it's draft season. It's officially draft season. Go check out NoCeilingsNBA.com. If there's a guy in this draft, I almost guarantee we've covered them in some form or fashion. So bulk of it is free. If you can afford it and can afford the paid tier, we got even more stuff over there too. So NoCeilingsNBA.com got a ton of awesome stuff for you.
Always has been, but even more so this year. It's been a life source for me because I've had to put the draft on the back burner because of some stuff in the personal life and also this podcast and some other things. So you guys have been keeping me afloat. I've got some stuff we can maybe, if we have time at the end, we'll hit on it. But so a couple things about the T-Wolves that I want to just kind of get your takes on and just kind of where we are. So everyone who is not a Wolves fan wrote Denver off after Game 2. Now, was that the most impactful defensive performance I've seen in the playoffs in a 24-minute stretch in my entire life? It's definitely not number 3 of a top 3. It's definitely up there. How much stock do you put into Denver's playoff experience being the reason that they have tied this series?
A ton. Minnesota sports are notorious for being one of the most tortured fan bases, and it's because of consistent collapses, and we might be seeing another one. But it's more than that. It's not just that they're an overwhelming favorite who are collapsing and not living up to expectations. Almost no one had the Timberwolves winning the series coming into it, and to just immediately write off Denver after going down 0-2 was ridiculous in the moment. It's even more ridiculous now. But when you have the best player in the world for arguably the last 5 years, who just won an NBA championship, and now you're telling me that he's washed, the team is overrated, they're done, they're going to get swept. Are you kidding me? Like, come on, what are we doing? So they've been here before. Jokic is an absolute skeleton key who can unlock anything. Whatever defense you throw at him, he's gonna eventually figure it out, especially over a 7-game series. And then you have guys like Jamal Murray, who's starting to get a little healthier. That huge time, those like 3-4 days off between games 2 and 3, did wonders for his calf. Aaron Gordon is making every shot possible right now, but also, they're putting the ball in his hands more, and he's kind of reverting a little more towards Orlando Aaron Gordon. So they have a ton of experience. They've been through this before. They won it all last year. So I think their maturity and just their all around versatility and consistency from their role players is paying huge dividends right now.
We didn't plan this in any way, shape, or fashion. I want people to understand that when they listen to this, but there was a nugget in there that I want to talk about. That was not completely pun unintended, by the way. Holy crap. Best player in the last 5 years on the other side. Like, I was going to talk about, like, I don't want to sit here and force this, like, okay, the Nuggets are who they are because of Jokic, but, like, all things considered, that's a really big thing to say. It is. But he's going to come up in all-time talks now, and, like, obviously the one championship does that. 4 MVP, or 3, could have been 4 MVPs, probably should have been somewhere in there. That's going to come up, right? But describe the fear, like, because that's something that, like, I have a pyramid tier. Every couple of years I'll update it. This offseason is supposed to be the next update. When you think of guys like you fear, right? Kevin Durant at the peak of his powers, no matter where he was, Golden State and Thunder aside, like, we'll put those by themselves. You feared him, right? LeBron, Michael Jordan, we all get it, right? Describe the fear that Jokic strikes watching him dominate a playoff game when you're going against him. Because as a Lakers fan, I understand what you're about to say for the next however many minutes.
It's tricky because I just expect it. So, whereas, like, when Jamal Murray starts getting hot, or Michael Porter Jr. starts getting hot, or Aaron Gordon knocks down his third turnaround fadeaway mid-range in a row, then it's like, oh God, like, oh no, it's starting. The avalanche is coming. But when Jokic just knocks down floater after floater after floater and racks up 5 assists in the blink of an eye, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, he's doing Nikola Jokic things. That's to be expected. And I don't know, like, yeah, obviously I'm terrified of him because he's the best player in the world yet again for the third, fourth, fifth year running. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I expect him to live up to the moment, to elevate the games of everyone around him and make the entire team better. The reason he's the MVP is because without him, they're a play-in team, maybe? That might be doing a little disservice, but 5, 6, I'd be surprised if they had home court. He's kind of the end-all be-all for them, and he has been every single year. And it's really difficult to figure him out because he can stretch the floor, he can take guys off the bounce, he can go in the post, and then the second you send a double team over, he's taking an escape dribble, changing the angle, delivering no-look passes, and setting up his teammates for the highest quality looks possible. So it's just, the game is so slow for him mentally. And just that consistency and ability to just constantly dissect a defense. It's incredible.
Yeah, I got a chance to see it. If people want to hear it, they can. They can go back to, I think it was maybe 2 years ago now. I went to a Hornets game on my birthday 2 years ago, and Denver was in town, and I was like, I just have to see it finally. Like, because this was like, this is pre-championship, right? So I'm like, all right, like, I just got to see what it is. And there's a moment, and I won't describe it now, but I'll just explain it briefly. There was a moment where he threw, talking about some of the passes and some of the stuff he just sees and how slow things develop. There was a moment where he threw a pass. I'm going to describe it poorly today, but this is just context for you. It does not matter to anyone else right now. But he was backing a guy down probably 20 feet on one side of the basket. And it's like he throws it over his opposite shoulder with his left hand. Like, it was one of those things I've never seen someone do in my entire life. And by the way, it made it 25 feet to the other corner for a wide open three. I've just, like, there's just things like that where I talk about fear, where, like, Magic Johnson was feared because he was passing like no one had ever passed before. It's that kind of level of stuff, which is where I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to think sometimes. So, enough about the Nuggets for a second, because I don't want to sit here and be the guy that is the Gobert punching bag, but he doesn't play in game 2, and it's a dominating performance. Granted, we know that they were capable of that. I'm not discrediting any of it. But do you see the coaching staff going away from him in crunch time in the next 3 games to potentially change that?
No, they haven't all year. They haven't for the past 2 years. I don't think he's the issue. When we look at that game 2, they were allowed to play with a level of physicality that no other team has been allowed to play with all season. So
yeah, you're right.
I think if Gobert's out there, I think the defensive performance is just even more impressive. It's just an easy kind of headline thing to go after because it was, people are describing it as the best defensive performance ever. That feels extraordinarily hyperbolic, especially when you go back to those 04 Pistons teams and look what they did to those Lakers and took Shaq and Kobe kind of out of that series. I tend to lean towards that team, but I think the biggest difference or the difference between that game 1 and 2 and this 3 and 4 is the whistle. I'm not saying it's a bad whistle or the league is rigged or anything like that, but it's been a tighter whistle, and they haven't been allowed to get away with the physicality that they did in game 2. That was an inordinate amount of contact, amount of energy, and it was just a different style that Denver wasn't used to seeing from the Timberwolves, getting picked up full court every single possession. Jamal Murray on that calf. He's had time to rest it. They've changed up how they've gotten into their offense. They've had other guys bring up the ball, get into their offense a little quicker. I don't think Rudy Gobert's the problem by any means.
All right, I'll flip the question. This is totally unprepared, but I've watched Karl-Anthony Towns enough, right? A 2015 draft class, right? We've learned a lot about this guy. Whether he is the best big man shooter of all time is probably another conversation for another day, probably for its own podcast, if we're being honest. But is there an adjustment that you would make centered around him? Because it feels like there's stretches throughout games. I won't pull any specifically just for the sake of context, but I'll just tell you there's just stretches where I think at one point in game 4, I think he was like 4 for 13 with 17 points or something like that, or 4 for 17 with 13 points or something stupid like that, where it's like he just goes through these stretches where like Ant might have had 60 if Cat didn't take over the game and be like, it's just like they have these moments where they can't just tell him like, hey, continue to be complimentary, continue to do the things you're doing. And I understand a guy who's the number one option, who's best player at Kentucky probably that year, and have to go back and look at it again just hypothetically here, but are there just moments where it's like, and I guess it's not technically the same Gobert question, but just are there moments where you're like just adamantly frustrated with Cat in big playoff moments, especially?
Yeah, the first half he couldn't have played worse in game 4. It was by far the worst he's played all postseason, and I think he's had a really good postseason. When you look at the shooting numbers going into game 4, he was, I think, the most prolific 3-point shooter in the postseason in the league. Not bad, but in that first half, Ant was rolling. He was getting his points, but they were really trying to get Cat in a rhythm too. But they were doing it, or they were trying to do it through the post. And he's just such a sloppy post-up player. His lower body is just, it's not strong. For someone at his size, he's not strong enough down there. And we constantly saw Aaron Gordon just wall him up. Theoretically, that should be a mismatch given the size disparities, but Aaron Gordon's significantly stronger than him, consistently stonewalls him, and Cat just forces it. He gets frustrated. He just starts throwing his body around, drawing or committing offensive fouls, and he was 1 of 10 shooting in that first half. It was a horrendous offensive display from him. So getting him in a rhythm early is absolutely crucial for them. Anthony Edwards can't play 45 minutes and score 40-plus points every night and win. It's just, you can't do it, especially against the reigning champs. So Cat has to show up in some form or fashion. If they're going to do it through the post, it has to be on switches. He has to get KCP or Jamal Murray or even Michael Porter Jr. on him. If it's Jokic or Aaron Gordon, post-ups aren't going to work. So instead, stretch the floor. Be one pass away from Ant. So when they collapse on his drives, Cat's an easy outlet there for him, and then he can start getting in the rhythm with some open threes. So he's crucial. He's super talented, and for 95% of this postseason, he's been really good. Game 4 was just brutal.
In game 4, the second half wasn't as bad as the first. I mean, I agree with you. That first half was, I had to go back and rewatch it just to think maybe I missed something. Maybe I was just reactionary. I know plus minus is kind of in a vacuum, something that gets overblown a little bit, but I will just read his plus minus over the last 4 games to kind of give people a story of how those games turned out and understand that sometimes it's real. In game 1, +6, game 2, +21. A lot of that had to do with the lead. A lot of that had to do with not having to play as much. I get it. Game 3, -32. And again, talking about the second half of game 4, he ended up with +4. So, I mean, look, I understand in a vacuum what that sounds like, but it does tell a good story of what he's performed. In game 3, honestly, might have been just as bad as the first half of game 4. So, what's stopping Jokic is not the answer, right? And I don't expect you to give me that answer. But what's the key if they want to win the series?
Oh boy, God, I'd be making so much more money if I knew the answer to that. So the tricky part in game 4 was that Aaron Gordon went off and had one of the best games of his entire career. You want to keep the mindset of if he's just going to keep making threes and tough, mid-range pull-ups and contested fadeaway jumpers, you're just going to have to live with it. He's shooting like 75% from 3 in the series. So is he going to cool off, or is it just going to be a hot streak and he's going to make 2 to 3 threes a game? The problem with that is then Reggie Jackson, Christian Brown, Justin Holiday also started piling on. So for taking away from Gordon, I think you have to still just be willing to let him shoot. You have to get some sort of a hand up, though. You can't just leave him completely wide open. It's the stuff around the rim where Gobert goes to double Jokic, and then Gordon slips in behind for an easy dunk. They did a lot better job of that, defending that in games 1 and 2. In games 3 and 4, they got really inconsistent and sloppy with Gobert roaming off ball. He got a little too aggressive. It seemed like once Jokic started kind of piling in the points, they almost started panicking and going to that double too early, or when Jokic had a clear view of them, instead of waiting for him to turn his head and then come from the other direction. Because if he sees you coming, you're dead. Possession's over. He's going to exploit it. So just being more consistent defensively with those doubles, with those rotations, not allowing Aaron Gordon to get in a rhythm by getting either wide open corner threes or easy dunks. And I mean, if Brown, Holiday, Jackson, and Gordon are going to combine for like plus 70% shooting in a game, you're just simply going to lose it.
I do think I think Aaron Gordon's the right answer. He obviously started. I don't know if you remember game 2. He started off that game. I mean, he had like heat check moments there for a little bit before the defensive.
I think he was like 15 in the first half or something.
Right, and it was like 3 for 4 from 3, and then 4 for 5, and then they just kept piling it on, and it was like, but Denver never kept control of the game, which is why I think that defensive performance spoke for itself. Was all right. Well, fine. Let Aaron Gordon have 40. Like, he's just not going to get there. We don't expect that from him. If he does, then fair play, tip the hat. But yeah, look, we know what he's capable of, and I think I'm interested how they're going to guard Jamal Murray again. Like, I know that you mentioned the whistle earlier, and I agree with you. I think that's something that changed completely. I think it changed in the Pacers series too, even with the Knicks injuries. I think some of that adjusted there and helped Indiana, because Indiana's not a great defensive team. So for them to be able to be that dominant in game 4, I know it was a lot from deep, but for them to just play the way they wanted to play because the Knicks weren't getting any whistles, I mean, that's just what happens when you play a road game in Indy. It is what it is. Who would you rather see in round 3 if the Timberwolves advance? Who would you rather see, the Mavs or the Thunder, and why?
The Mavs, because they're more banged up, and I think
that simple though? Is the bang? You're like, hey, Luka or I'm not discrediting SGA in any way, but you're asking a 23-and-a-half-year-old team to I don't know, man. Anyway, sorry I cut you off, but just
I do think whoever wins this Denver Minnesota series is going to go to the finals, but Minnesota has a lot better track record of giving Dallas some really, really tough issues with their length, their athleticism on the perimeter, and then just given Dallas's centers, they're not floor spacers at all. You take Maxi Kleber out of the lineup. He's unfortunately injured. That sucks. but from just a matchup standpoint, it simplifies things. So I just think they become a little easier to defend, and that's with knowing full knowledge that Kyrie and Luka can single-handedly take over an entire series. So I lean slightly towards Dallas.
All right, that's all the NBA playoff questions that I had at least written down. So I guess I'll give you before I ask you a draft question because I think it'd be fun to just extra few minutes we have here. Anything else about the playoffs that has just been itching, burning that you just haven't had a chance to bring up, maybe because of a podcast or because of just I don't know, maybe not the right place for it.
Oh boy, the Eastern Conference is a bummer. There have been some fun games, but whew, that's tough. I think we might need a little conference realignment, but who knows? We'll see
when we get Vegas and Seattle, if that's the two teams that if 100% people have been talking about it, they're going to go for $8.5 billion combined. Like you might be affected by that. I mean, Minnesota might be an Eastern Conference.
It's probably going to be Minnesota or Memphis would be my guess.
Regionally, both make the most sense. I think they'd have New Orleans is another one that makes sense. They're really close. I mean, they're like a hour and 15-minute flight to Miami or something stupid like that.
Yeah,
or hour and 2, something to Orlando. So it's like they could. There's a lot of interesting things that have to happen because they're going to have to pull two teams in and then figure out the other realignment. So no, look at the end of the day, the East, man, like it's just. If OG Anunoby didn't get hurt,
that sucks.
Honestly, like I do think Nick Celtics is like 6 at least, and
It'd be fun, yeah.
But I mean, this is the. I'll give a guy who comes on this podcast a ton, big Thunder fans, Grayson Hill. He texted me the other day. Boston is the lowest floor 60 win team ever, and I went through and looked at a lot of them. There was like 70 teams that have won 60 games, which is kind of nuts to think about. And I'm like, he might be right. Because there was some moments where I'm like, we know what they did last year against Philadelphia, right? That was obviously this isn't the same exact iteration of the team, but this core group has done it before, and I'm not sure. Even though they're playing a team that I feel like they're capable of beating handedly, sorry, Cavs fans, but they defensively they should not like Mitchell should be the only guy scoring what he's scoring. Yeah. Garland shouldn't be having these kind of games. Mobley's defensive impact alone has been incredible to watch. I know Porzingis' injury has been really interesting, but I said after game 2 when Minnesota did what they did, I said that I'm not sure there's a team that can beat Minnesota if they beat Denver, and I still kind of believe that. So, I don't know. That doesn't sum up everything in the East, but just I think what I've seen from Boston gives me enough light of hope. And if you're playing Boston in the finals, if you play like you did in game 2, obviously whistle dependent a little bit, I don't see why you can't beat Boston in the finals.
Yeah, it's just weird how they just kind of don't kill their
roll over. They just roll over.
They should be 4 games now. They're in the finals. They should be sweeping every round, given how talented and kind of deep they are. So I don't know. It's just weird. It's a very, very weird team, which isn't something we should be saying about them given their historic record, their historic net rating, their historic point differential, their historic domination in the conference. And yet just questions after questions after questions keep arising. Maybe it's just because we're bored. I feel like they're still kind of inevitable to come out of the Eastern Conference, and we're just desperate for some talking points or some drama or some competitiveness and uncertainty, which all those things we love in the playoffs, and I just don't really think it's there.
I don't have the odds in front of me. We're definitely bored because like right before the playoffs started, Denver Boston to make the finals on FanDuel, like to play each other, no result involved, was like plus 410. I was like, there's no way you're paying me to do that. Like there's just no way because the West is such a crapshoot. So
yeah.
All right. However you want to answer this is totally up to you. Who is somebody right now that maybe isn't talked about enough in the draft space for 2024 that either your personal board eventually will look like it or maybe the national board, however you want to look at this question. I'm trying to figure out the best way to word it. Who's somebody that we're going to look up in a month? Because it always happens. There's going to be somebody who has a hell of a combine. Who's somebody we're all going to look up in a month when they're drafted 19th or 8th? And we're like, wow. Somebody that, not necessarily from a mock standpoint, but from just their performance recently, something like that. Who's somebody that we're all going to look up? And it's not. Don't say Tristan Da Silva. Whatever you do.
I was going to say.
I do. I've thought about it right before. I was like, let me finish, and then leave.
If he goes like 10-ish, don't be surprised. I'll leave it at that. I'll come
Fair.
up with a new name. I'll get a little more creative.
Like the national people who are just not draft people, they watch the draft and they're for their favorite team, and they're like, oh my God, blank went to the whoever fell to like 8 or 9 or 10 in the lottery. I don't remember who it was, but
so I'll go a little deeper than that, but I'm gonna say the two NBL guys, AJ Johnson and Trenton Flowers, excuse me. I would assume I'm getting the feeling that both of them are going to go first round pretty easily. AJ Johnson's measurements came in a little shorter than ideal today, unfortunately, but still about 6'6" in shoes. Both of them are freak athletes, really raw, and you're going to look at their NBL numbers and they suck. The NBL numbers are terrible. Ignore the numbers because they got a really raw deal over there with the Rising Stars program, and they just didn't get any consistency, any minutes whatsoever. Trent Flowers sent the NBL scoring record for a single quarter. The next game, he played 2 minutes. So that's the kind of stuff that they had to deal with. So these guys are raw. They have fans. They're very skilled. They have some positional versatility. And if they have a really big combine, they shoot well, they interview well. I would expect their names to be kind of called a little sooner than a lot of the mock drafts are showing.
Totally unrelated, and we'll get out of here. I've come around on Rob Dillingham in the last month and a half from what little draft work I have done, and then I had some friends in Portsmouth talking to people, and they said that there are a lot of teams in the top 4 that are excited about Rob Dillingham, and I said, fair point. All right, plug away, and then I appreciate your time as always.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at TMetcalf11. All the draft stuff over at NoCeilingsNBA.com. Got YouTube channel, No Ceilings NBA, socials, No Ceilings NBA, all that good stuff. But yeah, this is fun. I appreciate the invite.
We do a little show around here called Trivia Showdown, and this is my personal invitation that you and Metcalf, you and Rucker need to go head to head. I wasn't even looking at that. The bad part is I knew what I was going to say, and then I still didn't say it properly. But no, this is an open invite that in the summer, once the draft calms down, there's that nice lull period we call July in the basketball world, post July 4th, free agency, the whole thing, that you and Rucker need to go head to head on Trivia Showdown. I don't believe he's competed before that I think of now I think about it, but open invitation, and I look forward to having you back hopefully for that.
Love it.
So thanks, my friend. All right, big thank you to Tyler Metcalf for coming on and talking the last couple of minutes about the Timberwolves. Really quick before we get out of here, as you see in the title, the Hawks have won the 2024 NBA Draft Lottery. We're going to talk a few minutes about that. Look, ultimately, Atlanta getting it makes things more fun for us as NBA content creators and people. But with Atlanta winning it, think about the implications of the draft lottery when it comes to, teams tanking. And this is really I'm not really here to tell you that this is a perfect system. But before we jump into that, here's the results of the 2024 NBA Draft Lottery. Atlanta was 1, Washington 2, Houston 3, San Antonio 4, Detroit, Charlotte, Portland 5, 6, and 7. San Antonio gets the Raptors pick, which was a result of the Jakob Poeltl trade. It fell where it did not go to the Raptors, so the San Antonio Spurs get 4 and 8. 9 is Memphis, 10 is Utah, 11 Chicago, 12 the number 1 seed in the West, the Oklahoma City Thunder, 13 Sacramento, and 14 Portland. So Portland ends up with 7 and 14, and they join San Antonio with multiple picks in the lottery. The Hawks had a 3% chance. Obviously, they finished 10th in the Eastern Conference, 36 and 46. Obviously, they also were able to lose the play-in game. So when you think about, where this lands, the thought process of a team like tanking necessarily, right? We've obviously had, famous tanking instances for Victor Wembanyama. We've had instances where the process was its own thing under Sam Presti, under Sam Hinkie. And at the end of the day, the process is something that ultimately we know did not work out. The Thunder, while not necessarily tanking the last couple of years, we know Sam Presti has put his team in a position to potentially win an NBA championship this year with an average age under the age of 26. So ultimately, this is a result of the lottery still being a random system. It's still statistics. It's still probabilities, right? I'm not with the people that are all week you're going to hear about talking about we should change the draft lottery. There's no reason. Like, it should reward the best teams, worst teams. Do it like the NFL. Because if we did it like the NFL, then we would have the process every year. We would have teams consistently tanking and consistently being at the bottom and consistently being okay with that. And I'm just not there with that. Obviously, the lottery has given us, three different instances really that were significant in the grand scheme of NBA history. One of them being really significant. So this year, Washington and Detroit had the top pick chances at 14%. Only 4 teams have won the lottery with similar odds than Atlanta. Orlando with 1.52% chance in 1993, and the Magic were able to turn the rights from Chris Webber. They made a draft night trade with Golden State for Penny Hardaway to go to Orlando, which ultimately that ends up, obviously 3 future first-round picks were in that deal. That 1.52% chance of it going to Golden State changed the landscape of NBA history. Chris Webber ultimately ends up being a Warrior. Penny Hardaway ultimately ends up pairing up with Shaq, which we know, of course, did not win an NBA title, but the fortunes of 2 franchises were completely changed that night. Obviously, we don't know how it would play out if Penny would have stayed in Golden State. If Chris had been over there, do they, obviously the year before they got Shaq, so would they have wanted to take Chris Webber? Yeah, it would have been a whole ordeal, right? It obviously was a whole ordeal. Chris Webber wasn't going to be a Orlando Magic. Look, San Antonio last year got Victor Wembanyama. We know that. Really, the other one that I bring up that I think is important for the context of NBA history, we don't know how it would change this guy's career if it went differently and where, but the Bulls had a 1.7% chance to win the number 1 overall pick, and they drafted Derrick Rose when they won that lottery. The hometown kid from Chicago. The story was perfect, right? It gives us important context to things that happened in NBA history. Derrick Rose obviously went on to be one of the youngest MVP in NBA history, as well as obviously had a tumultuous injury history in the NBA while being a valuable role player later in his career. It really stinks that he didn't get an NBA championship. Hopefully, maybe he signs last couple of years with the team here. If he hasn't already officially said he's retiring, I haven't heard that, but. Look, these ultimately, I'm just giving you these examples and these results that are important for contextualizing NBA history because they're going to give us important moments. They're going to give us things that are very exciting. And at the end of the day, what we've seen, there hasn't been enough instance where teams continuously you're going to see teams get these results, right? People are arguing that this is the X amount of times it's happened in the last X amount of years. And it's like, right, teams are going to jump. It's ultimately probability, right? You're still rewarded the highest possible odds and chances if you're a top 4 team, right? They ultimately still have it. I mean, look, there was a really incredible article a few years ago written by, I want to make sure I get the guy's name right. It was from CBS Sports, Sam Quinn. He did an article basically what teams are luckiest and what teams are not. And, technically the greatest gain, net, or loss based on wins and losses, the Sixers have gained 24 spots in the lottery based on where their wins were and losses were based on relative projection. Charlotte was plus 14, Lakers are plus 9, Cavs are plus 6, and there's just a bunch of log jams there. Bottom few are Golden State minus 10, Miami minus 11, Dallas minus 12, and Minnesota is the unluckiest team in the lottery, despite having a number 1 overall pick in Kevin Garnett, which is interesting to think about. Charlotte, who has not won the number 1 overall pick in the modern Hornets era, and they continuously are getting good draft position. This year was not one of those cases. Really great article. I'll link it below. Just talks about some of the history of it and some of the who had the best worst and best luck and why relative to their success. But again, I'm not here to tell you that it isn't going to be more interesting that Atlanta won the draft lottery, right? This is still a relatively weaker draft compared to consensus in years past. You're hearing from NBA teams that this is equivalent of getting like the 8th pick or whatever. I'm not necessarily going to go that far with it, but what I'm sitting here telling you is that this makes things more fun. In a draft that might be a little bit more boring or might be a little bit more, okay, these guys aren't going to turn into superstars, which, by the way, we're going to be wrong. Some of these guys are going to turn out to be incredible players, and that's kind of the fun of all of this, right? I think, there's going to be some names at the top that are going to be busts, and we're all going to be like, well, this class was this, or that. At the end of the day, what this does is it puts us in a position to see Atlanta be at kind of a fork in the road moment. They have to figure out what they want to do with Trae Young. They have to figure out what they want to do with DeJounte Murray. They've got a few more years out of Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu. They've got a couple of other younger, deeper rotational players in Jalen Johnson and DeAndre Hunter who are on extended contracts. So Atlanta's in the position where can they get rid of Trae Young? Absolutely. Who's going to take him on? Your guess is as good as mine. But they've got a perennial piece here in the number 1 overall pick, even in a weaker draft. Obviously I don't want to get into the specifics of what I might do. I'm still processing all this and might have a guest here soon to talk about what the Hawks could be doing. But ultimately, they're at a fork in the road moment where they decide, is Trae Young the future and piece of their franchise that can help win them a championship? And if not, is there a way they can use this deal or use Trae or use both to put themselves in a position to be able to get that done? And your guess is as good as mine. Hope you enjoyed the podcast today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you're on YouTube. 5-star rating and a review is going to be greatly appreciated if you're on Apple, Spotify, or any of our amazing podcast platforms. Don't forget that the Two Pointers podcast is sponsored by SeatGeek. You could use code 2pointers, $20 off your first purchase. Link in the top of the description, SeatGeek.com or in the app. Greatly appreciate the support from everyone as well as from SeatGeek. Don't forget, again, like, comment, subscribe, 5-star rating and review is greatly appreciated. Let me know your comments and your thoughts on the Hawks winning the lottery or the Timberwolves and Nuggets. You'll hear this a day early. This will go out on Tuesday morning, Tuesday the 14th of May. Which will be really cool, so you'll have an extra day there. May get a pod on Friday as well. Just depends on how the NBA playoffs shift around in there. But got some really cool content coming soon. Like I said, Trivia Showdown is going to be back here in a couple of weeks. So with that being said, this has been the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett, and we will see you soon.